I was the only man for billions of kilometers in every direction. Thousands of women of an alien race surrounded me. How did I end up in this situation? To answer that, we need to go back a few days. I walk the corridors of a station on the distant ice moon Orpheus 9. I'm Lucas, an engineer they call in for emergency sites, hired to handle it and disappear. The contract is simple: 2 weeks, then home. The station was listed as an outdated, mothballed facility, but it ran too well. I followed the inspection route, logging temperature, pressure, and power, and kept thinking the same thing. The logs looked like someone had recently scrubbed away footprints. A couple of hours later, I was back in the HAB module, started the coffee maker, and skimmed the documentation. Buried between the dull items was an appendix with no explanation, the cryo section. Archive block. I didn't like either word. The cryo corridor was whiter and colder than the rest of the station. The quiet felt thicker, and my steps came out softer, as if the metal itself didn't want to be remembered. Capsules stood in rows that faded into the half-dark, and the dates on their markings looked ancient. It felt like a cemetery without death, and death, oddly enough, is more honest. One capsule had an indicator lit, test unit. Through the frosted glass, I could make out a female, humanoid silhouette. By protocol, it was clear. The system allowed a test thaw, which meant I was supposed to do it. Humanly, I didn't want to press the button. Not out of fear, out of a dislike for surprises that looked too much like people. The system asked for confirmation in a voice as dry as paper. I confirmed. The glass cleared, the fluid shivered, the dome opened slowly, like it was afraid to wake something that had slept too long. She inhaled, sharp, hungry, and opened her eyes at once. The look wasn't panic, it was focused, intelligent, like she instantly understood. I was alone here. "You are warm," she rasped. "Is that a compliment or a medical observation?" Her lips twitched, almost a smile. "Haven't decided yet. What's your name, warm one?" "Lucas, engineer, not a kidnapper." "Alier." She rose, swayed, and I caught her by the elbow without thinking. Skin on skin, warm against cold, and that second burned itself into memory. "So, Lucas the engineer," she said softly, studying me with bright, living curiosity. "Looks like we should get acquainted, since we're both here, for work." I snorted, feeling the station stop being empty. Only then did I notice the rows of other capsules behind her, disappearing under the ice. I didn't know how many decisions could begin with one button, but for the first time in years, I wanted the next minute not to be empty. After Alier woke, the station stopped pretending it was dead. Before, I'd heard only the ventilation and my own footsteps. Now there was someone else's breathing, the faint whisper of fabric, quiet movement in the adjacent compartment. Emptiness backed off a step, and with it went my old confidence that everything around me would obey protocol. I tried to do what I always did, check logs, compare readings, note the strange perfection of the systems. Ayler did the opposite. She studied me, not pushy, more like someone who hadn't seen anything new in a long time, and decided to start with the most obvious thing in the room. She'd appear beside me out of nowhere, peer at a panel like she understood it better than I did, and watch my face as if the station's main interface was hidden there. "You're making that expression again," she said when I reread the same line for the third time. "What expression?" I asked without looking up. "The one that says, 'I'm about to fix the whole universe.' I like it." I huffed. If I'd been alone, I would have blamed it on exhaustion and coffee. But she was real, warm, and her eyes kept pulling me back into the present. And one thought kept showing up, sharp and inconvenient. One awakened woman in an empty complex wasn't humane or smart, even if you pretended feelings weren't part of the equation. The test activation protocol sat in front of me in dry lines of text. I hated when a choice dressed itself up as an instruction, but right then, it was useful. I could act by the rules, and not admit I simply didn't want to leave her alone. In the cryo section, the cold felt denser. I chose the next capsule and confirmed the start. Light trembled, glass cleared, and the woman inside returned to the world slowly, like she was testing it for strength before opening her eyes. Everything about her was softer. Movement, gaze, breath. "Hello," she said quietly when she saw me. "I'm Lucas," I said. "Engineer." "Leora." Ayler stood a little ways off, far too attentive for a casual observer. Leora looked at me like she wasn't judging my features so much as listening to what I wasn't saying. I triggered the third activation almost automatically, and understood almost immediately that this woman would be Leora's opposite. She woke sharply, like sleep itself had offended her. She sat up, looked around, stood, and stepped too close to me, with no embarrassment and no hesitation. "You're human," she said with certainty, "and tall. Those often come as a package deal," I said. Cyan, she introduced herself like the name was supposed to mean something already, and her look did mean something. Direct, appraising, faintly amused. I felt Alir tense beside me, while Leora grew quiet, like water right before a wave. After that, everything happened almost invisibly, but I caught every small detail. Who handed me a tool first? Who lingered near while I wrote notes? Who chose silence in a way that made it louder than words? The looks grew longer, the pauses heavier, and the air took on that charged warmth you usually get in cramped rooms and bad decisions. To me, it looked like a strange, almost funny game against a backdrop of ice and steel. But when I caught their faces, especially when they thought I wasn't watching, it was obvious. For them, it wasn't a game. It was their first choice after too long a sleep. Their first chance to say I want and have it mean something. By evening, we were in the common section as four, counting the station, which was learning how to be alive again. I looked at them and understood something simple. The ice moon wasn't empty anymore, and that meant my mission wasn't going to stay the same. On the third day, I caught myself in a new habit. Time stopped being measured in hours. I started recognizing it by sound. By the way, Alir appeared beside me, almost noiseless, like a shadow that didn't want to startle. By Leora's light steps, arriving right when my shoulders started to sag. By Cyan's confident stride, like the station had belonged to her since her first breath. Orpheus 9 wasn't just a machine anymore. It had become something like a home, temporary, wrong, but alive. We were in the observation bay when I pulled up the cryo-block map again. Beneath the ice, rows of capsules stretched out, straight, endless, like someone's neat mistake. I stared down and felt something personal in that geometry. Like I was standing on the lid of an enormous box I had no right to open, and had already opened. Leora asked softly, almost without pressure, but the question still hit me in the chest like a cold tool. Why are we here? I could have answered in protocol language, invented a dry explanation, but the words wouldn't come. Too many coincidences on this station looked deliberate. I opened the archive, the hologram flared, and the familiar lightness in the air vanished. Imperial markings, dry wording, long lines where a living person was reduced to a storage unit. The farther I scrolled, the clearer it got. This silence had been engineered, measured and financed as carefully as any military project. Long ago, these women's civilization had tried to stop the expansion of a dominant empire, not necessarily with weapons, not necessarily with war. They simply stood in the way, said no to a power that wasn't used to hearing it, and for that they weren't destroyed. Destruction is too fast, too honest, too loud. Instead, they were put away. The word preservation sounded almost domestic until I read the next line. Convert into a living warning. Not a monument, not a memorial, a warning. For other worlds. For anyone who might someday think to try what they tried. Thousands of women were placed into cryosleep, not dead and not alive, suspended in between, locked away for centuries at the right temperature and the right silence, stripped of a future and the right to choose. I read those lines and the truth landed like weight. This wasn't an archive block. It was a prison where you couldn't hear the prisoners. I looked at them, one by one, like I needed to verify reality. Lyra stood perfectly still, eyes closed, her lips trembling slightly the way they do when someone tries to hold a memory in place so it won't tear them open from the inside. Sayan curled her fingers until her knuckles went white. Her anger wasn't loud. It was dense, dangerously quiet. Alir stopped smiling. Her face turned stern and adult, and there was more pain in that composure than in tears. And then guilt hit me, not for waking them, but for waking only them. 3, and leaving the rest under the ice. Like I'd pulled a handful of sparks out of the dark and pretended that was enough, while beneath my boots an entire sky still lay switched off by someone else's decision. I wanted to say something right, comfort them, explain, but words felt cheaper than ice. I just stood there staring at the cryo-block map, those endless lines of capsules, and for the first time a kind of clarity settled in, the kind that makes cold feel warmer. If I'd already pressed the first button, there was no way back, and if I kept going, it couldn't be halfway. Not just a little, not as much as is safe, all the way. Morning on Orpheus 9 smelled like metal and hot coffee, about as hot as coffee gets on an ice moon. I barely slept. Instead, my head replayed the cryo-block map, the endless rows of capsules, and one simple thought you couldn't swat away with protocol. 3 awakened women isn't a rescue. It's an exception, and exceptions in places like this always feel like cruelty. I opened the contract like I might find a loophole for my conscience. The lines were all the usual. Do not interfere, follow procedures, avoid escalation. Easy words to write in a warm office in orbit, I closed the file and logged dryly. Biological cryoblock discovered. Even in reports, I couldn't bring myself to write the word prison. I ran the numbers again and again. We had enough power if we woke them in waves. The loops would hold if I didn't spike pressure. Ventilation would have to go manual, or it would drown in humidity. We'd need thermal blankets and food laid out, a makeshift med bay, simple routes marked by sector, so the newly awakened didn't wander lost through identical corridors. None of it was impossible, and that made it worse. If it could be done, then I was obligated. Saiyan paced the habitat module like a deck before a fight. There was impatience in her movement, like she was shouldering time out of the way. Leora did the opposite. Silent, careful, stacking everything she could find into neat piles, med kits, food packs, thermal blankets. It looked almost ridiculous, building welcome kits for 1,000 women, but in that ridiculous thoroughness, there was real care. Alir appeared beside me without a sound. She didn't ask, didn't rush me, didn't argue. She just stared at the map as if she saw faces under the ice, not capsules. Sometimes her fingers brushed the panel, and I caught myself following that motion with my eyes for too long. "You've already decided," she said once. It wasn't a question. I tried to joke, but all that came out was a short, "Yeah." And I think it was the most honest thing I'd said in days. The rivalry between them didn't disappear. It just got subtler. Science slid tools into my hand before I realized I needed them, like we'd been a team forever. Leora brought water and left it nearby, never demanding thanks. Alir chose her moments. She was there exactly when doubt started to rise in me, and her silence did more work than any argument. Sometimes I caught their looks, quick, measuring, painfully human. There was jealousy there, but not mean. A fear of dissolving into a future where thousands more would wake, and I'd stop being rare. And somehow it warmed me. Not because I enjoyed the attention, but because I could see it. They were alive. They weren't storage units anymore. They could want again. They could choose. Before I started the main sequence, I went down to the cryo corridor one more time. It was quiet like a sealed room. I ran my palm across the glass of the nearest capsule, leaving a dull arc on the frost. And for the first time, I let myself feel anger. Simple, wordless anger at the people who built a living warning and called it order. I returned to the central console where the full protocol could be launched. My finger hovered over confirmation. Once I pressed it, I wouldn't have the right to say I changed my mind. I'd be the one who opened the doors, and after that, the world could call it whatever it wanted. I drew a slow, even breath, the way they teach you in emergency control training. "We do it in waves," I said out loud, mostly to myself. "No panic, no heroics." Behind me, Saiyan gave a quiet, amused sound. Leora exhaled softly. Alir touched my elbow, briefly like a period at the end of a sentence. I hit confirm. Deep under the ice, the loops began to hum, and the first chain of new points lit up on the map. Orpheus 9 began to wake, not for protocol anymore, but for life. The first points appeared almost quietly, like sparks under ice only someone watching closely would notice. Then the other quiet arrived. Wet, living, human. Ventilation breathed heavier. Vapor hung in the corridors. Filters complained at the limit. The station, used to sterility, began to smell for the first time in centuries. Not like metal, but like bodies. The noise grew. Pumps, footsteps, coughing, quick gulps of air. I caught myself feeling something like gratitude. If a place makes noise, it's alive. I stood at the central console and barely remembered to blink. Wave after wave, first dozens, then hundreds. Each capsule opened differently, some with a soft hiss, some with a sharp snap, like the metal was tired of waiting. Some woke in silence and just sat there listening to the world. Some choked on their first breath and couldn't stop coughing. Some cried before they even realized they were crying. I watched faces that hadn't yet settled into expressions and understood. 1,000 isn't a number. It's thousands of stories returned to breathing. Leora and I set up a med station right in the passageway. Thermal blankets, water, simple gesture-based instructions, light markers on the floor so no one got lost in identical corridors. Leora worked like she'd always known how. Quieter than necessary, more precise than seems possible. Scion took over the flow through the sectors. She split groups, paused at narrow turns, lined women up in a chain so each one saw a living person ahead of her, not a wall. She had a lot of strength, but now she spent it on order, not performance. Alir moved among the awakened and pulled them into the present with nothing but her presence, staying beside those who stared at walls like illusions and were afraid to blink, taking a hand until breathing steadied, simply standing there until emptiness left a person's eyes. Sometimes the women looked at me like I was supposed to say something. I couldn't find the words. At this scale, words turn into slogans too fast, and I didn't want to become a slogan. I could only do watch pressure, hold the heat loop, manage the wake schedule so the station didn't choke on its own success. But the stares multiplied. They clung to me with gratitude and expectation, and for the first time I understood what it meant to be a symbol, not by order, but by someone else's need. Earlier, their attention had felt like a game, light competition. Now it was heavy, like duty, and I wanted to hide behind a panel where things are honest and measurable. A few faces stuck with me, not because I wanted them to, but because memory chooses for you. One woman who looked barely grown stepped out and couldn't take a step for a long time. She touched the floor with her fingertips like she was afraid it would dissolve. Another laughed when she saw the stars through the viewport, and two more joined her, not out of joy, but out of relief that they could make a sound and not be shut down for it. A third, older than the others, kept a palm on her chest, counting heartbeats, whispering something like a prayer. When she finally looked up at me, there was no request in her eyes, only an effort to believe the sleep was over. The rivalry didn't vanish, it just grew up. Leora stopped hunting for my attention and took her place beside her people. Cyan stopped testing boundaries and held the line so no one got lost. And still, I noticed how they tracked where I stood, who I turned toward, whose voice I lingered on. But it wasn't competition anymore. It was fear. Fear of dissolving into the many once freedom finally belonged to everyone. And that fear was more honest than any jealousy. By the end of the third wave, my hands were shaking. I sat on the floor against the wall, not trying to look strong, and for the first time let myself just exhale. Aylar lowered herself beside me. No questions, no speeches, no demand for heroics. Her shoulder was close, and that closeness was enough to pull myself together. "You're holding on honestly," she said quietly. I nodded. Honesty was the only thing I had left. When the last hundreds of points lit up on the map, I understood. The prison couldn't pretend to be an archive anymore. There was too much breathing here, too many voices, too much future. And inside that future, the clearest thing I felt was this. Next to Aylar, I was calm, not because she promised anything, because she simply stayed. The final wave ended without fanfare, just a color change on an indicator. One cryo module went dark, then another, and the map that had pulsed like a heart monitor smoothed out into an even field of green marks. I stood at the console and couldn't move at first, not because I was tired. Tired had become background noise, simply because, for the first time in days, I didn't have to press next. It was as if the station offered a pause and let me hear my own breathing. The quiet in the complex became something else. Before it had been dead and sterile, like a freezer. Now it held footsteps, voices, laughter, the rustle of clothing, careful breaths, quick questions. Women gathered in clusters. Some held hands, some searched for familiar faces. Some sat on the floor getting used to the fact that time was flowing again, and you couldn't hide from it. I caught fragments of their speech and understood. They talked about the future like it had always been right there, just behind a closed door. And yet the strongest thing was what didn't happen. No one demanded I stay. No one tried to turn freedom into a deal. Gratitude came in small, quick pieces. A look, a nod, a light touch on my hand. No pomp and no chains. It made it hard to keep my face steady. You can't answer that kind of gratitude by protocol. The shuttles in the docks were prepped quickly and almost calmly. Leora quietly kept order, standing exactly where she needed to, her steady confidence straightening shoulders around her. Cyan was motion itself, tightening harnesses, handing out blankets, catching those who started to panic and bringing them back into their bodies with one firm gesture. I helped out of habit, ran diagnostics, checked locks, verified fuel. Machines don't forgive sentiment, and that was a relief. Numbers make it easier not to fall apart. Sometimes it felt like they whispered my name more often than necessary, like they were checking whether the man who pressed that button really existed. Cyan walked past and brushed my wrist with hers, like stamping one of us, then moved on without looking back. Leora paused for a second, adjusted a blanket on one woman's shoulders, and looked at me so calmly I felt ashamed of my doubts. No scenes, no drama. Just work that had suddenly become the beginning of life for everyone. When the first shuttles started to leave, I stepped into the observation bay. The panoramic display showed the darkness of space and the bright rim of ice slowly separating under heat flows. In the distance, the lights of departing craft flickered, and each fading light meant another piece of the past released. Beautiful, calm, almost unreal after everything we'd pulled out of eternity. I could have left with them. That would have been right for a contractor following a contract. But the thought of going back to my old life suddenly felt like another kind of sleep, just more comfortable. I didn't hear footsteps. It just got warmer beside me, like someone had slid a small sun up against my shoulder. Alir stepped in next to me in silence, without questions. There was more understanding in that silence than in any conversation. She looked where I looked, and I didn't have to explain my doubts. She saw them as clearly as the ice lines on the screen. Next to her, I didn't want to justify myself. I wanted to be honest. In the docks, the noise thinned like a wave pulling back into darkness. I returned to the last airlock and saw that Alir wasn't in line. She wasn't fussing, wasn't looking around like she'd already made her choice, and was waiting for me to catch up to it with words. "Your shuttle," I started, and heard how formal it sounded. She smiled, calmly, without play, without a trace of rivalry. "You gave us a future, and I'm choosing mine. Beside you." It took me a second to accept the simplicity of that sentence. No vows, no debts, just a choice. The same kind of choice I'd given all of them, and the first one that came back to me, not as responsibility, but as freedom. I didn't answer with words. I stepped closer, and that was enough. When the last shuttle disappeared into the dark, the station grew quieter, but not empty. We stood at the screen and watched the stars, not as an escape route, but as open space ahead. And I understood the story of 1,000 freed women ended not in legend and not in reward, but in freedom finally becoming mutual.